Perfect. Let's kick it off. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third client webinar. We're going to be focusing on fee for service space. That's the contract modules, level 1, 2, and 3. So we're doing this webinar series to really help educate folks. There's been a lot of things built over the years. There's a lot of changes to modules, and we want to make sure that people know what is offered by the platform, what things might be of value to them. And if you do already have the module, there may be some things that you might not know it can do and some shortcuts to make there be less clicks in the platform. So our purpose as an organization is to help those that are helping others. We want to make sure that we're empowering your frontline folks to be able to deliver the best care, and then also help on the reporting pieces to make sure that we're able to inform funders as well. The end goal, as we think about being able to support the frontline clinicians, is really to help have better health outcomes and support your clients in their journeys for care. So we are doing a couple more webinar series in month. So tomorrow we're going to be doing the CHIME and the EMHware. And then on next Tuesday, we'll be doing the clinical modules, which is the prescription writer, OCAN, the medical administration record, and the CHA. So great ones to check out. We will be continuing the series in January as well, doing things like client portal, the BI module that we're about to launch, Ocean, and a few others. So keep an eye on your emails. We're going to send out another email with a whole bunch of registration links early in the new year so that folks can sign up and see what else the platform can do. Today, we're going to be covering the 3 levels of contract module. With each level, there's additional functionality involved based on your needs. Feel free to use the Q&A button in the bottom taskbar. You can ask questions anytime. Amanda's going to be checking that. She's going to be responding. Maggie, who's leading the demos today, will also be able to jump in and show you directly in the platform what that looks like if you have a really specific or nuanced question. You don't need to wait to the end. You can ask anytime, and we'll be able to either answer them typed, or at the end, we'll do additional walkthroughs based on the information. At the end of the session, you will be receiving a survey. Please fill it out. It's giving us feedback on how to make these more valuable for you. We've made changes based on the first day's feedback. So any feedback we're actioning for the next day. So the more, the merrier. And we're excited to kick this off. So I'm going to hand it over to Maggie to kick off the demo piece.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everyone. As Sam mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the 3 different levels of the contract module this morning. So I will share my screen and we can get started with level 1. So level 1 of the contract module is normally used for basic fee-for-service programs, or also for employee assistance programs. I'm going to go ahead and just grab a client. And all contracts are set up through program history. Once the contract has been created, we can access and edit it through the client's contract tab, but they all have to be set up initially through program history. So they're all tied to a program history record. You're able to designate certain programs as being contract programs. So then when you're creating a program history record in one of those contract programs, we'll fill it out like we normally would. And then you'll see this contract piece here. The contract module does integrate with the client portal, so you can decide on a contract by contract basis if you want the client to be able to access their contract through the portal if you're also using the client portal. We can input a contract number, or we can have EMHware auto-generate that for us. If there's a separate approval number, we can also enter that. Contract source is where we can input the client's employer if this was for EAP. I'm just going to leave that blank for now, and we'll do a fee-for-service program first. We can then enter the start date of the contract, or if we leave that blank, it will auto-populate with the receiving services date. We can enter the contract expiration date, or we can have EMHware auto-populate that to the end of the next fiscal year for us. Close date will autofill when we either discharge the client from this program or when we mark the contract as no longer being active. And then you'll see here we can set a contract rate. So this is a base rate for the contract, which means if we were charging the client the same amount for every service that we're providing them under this program, we can use this contract base rate. We can set it by either session or hour. So if we were to set a rate by hour, we put in $50. That means every contact that we do under this program, it's going to charge the client $50 per hour. Or we can set it by session, which means that no matter how long the contact is, it's going to be a $50 charge per contact. And there's the option to set maximum units as well. Or we can set a contract rate by activity. And that allows us to put in a different charge based on the activity that we're doing with the client. So you'll see this activity rate list option. And we're able to then set rates by activity. We can also set default rates. So if every time we do one-on-one counseling, it's going to be the same charge, or the majority of the time it's going to be the same charge. We can set up a default rate so we don't have to enter that in every time. You can see it's set it to $75 an hour. But we do have the option to override that on the contract basis if we wanted to. And then we can add in any other activities and different rates that we have for those activities. You can see the psych evaluation also had a default rate set of $200 per session. There's no default rate set for cancellation, so we could put that in. And then once we have those activity rates set, if we start entering contacts in this client's file under that program that the client has a contract in with one of those activities that's been set, it's going to create charges. So if we record an hour of one-on-one counseling, it's going to charge the client $75. And then we also have the option to record payments. So if the client pays for this session, we can add in a client transaction. This transaction type dropdown is all customizable. So if you need to keep track of how the client's paying, you can put different options in here. And if we want to record that the client paid $75, we can enter that transaction in. And it's going to keep a running total of the client's balance. If we go to the client's contract tab, here we can see all of the client's active contracts. If I scroll to the far right, I'm going to get their overall balance, which is $0 right now. I can see they've had total charges of $75 and also have made payments for $75, so their balance is $0. We can also access a list of all of their transactions that the client has made using their contract tab here. Opening up client transactions, we get the list of all payments made. And then we can just keep doing the same thing, entering more contacts with these activities in the client's file, and it will create charges every time. And then we can record payments as they happen. If we want to use level 1 to do to record our employee assistance program, I'm going to just get another client for that, and we can do a new contract. Here's where we would pick the contract source. So we can set who the client's employer is here that's paying for the service. This just pulls from the agency address book, so you could have a category for those employers. And then we can select this client. And then we can also set activity rates by contract source. So if you have different contracts with each employer, you're going to charge a different amount based on who the employer is. We can actually set those activity rates so that the default that shows up here, you can see one-on-one counseling is now set to $100 an hour. So we can set those by contract source. So those defaults will change depending on who the client's contract source is. Again, those can be overridden at the contract level if needed. And we can also put in a maximum number of hours or sessions per activity. So if we have a contract with this employer to pay $100 an hour for one-on-one counseling for up to 10 hours of each client, we could enter the maximum number of hours. And then you'll see now when we go to enter a contact with that one-on-one counseling activity, it doesn't charge the client because they have a contract source set, but it shows us here how many units are remaining. So after this one, the client has 9 more hours of one-on-one counseling that they can utilize within their contract. And then at the end of the month or the quarter or whenever, we could run a report that would show us all of the contacts that we entered tied to a particular contract source. So based on the employer, you could run a report that shows you everything that was done within their contracts for the specified date range. I think that's it for level 1.
Maggie, before you go to level 2, we have a question here that says, what does the invoice and statement look like for the client or the employer?
We don't have an invoice template for either, so it would just be a matter of running that report at the end of the date range, getting your totals, and then I guess creating an invoice separately for what you want to provide the employer with.
Yeah, just to add on that, the invoices and receipts are going to be built out in Q1. So there will be invoices by the, I think, the start of March.
Okay, so on to level 2 then. So for level 2, I'm going to do the same thing, create a program history record in one of our contract programs. You'll see you have all of the same fields as level 1 available to us here. But now we also have the option to add in a budget for the client. And what that means is when we put those activities into the client's file, that in level 1 creates a charge that the client has to pay for. When the client has a budget, instead of charging the client, it's just going to take that money off the client's overall budget. So if we were to set a budget for this client of, we'll say, $5,000, once that budget has been entered, we can't adjust that number unless we make a budget adjustment. So if we wanted to add or take away money from the client's budget, we can put in a budget adjustment. This adjustment type dropdown is all customizable, so you can record why you're making the adjustment. So if I wanted to add, we'll say $500, I can do it as an adjustment. And that way, every change made to the budget is all tracked. And then once we have our budget set for the client, we can do the same thing. We can add in those activity rates. Again, we can set default rates. We can see this activity of individual counseling has been set to $150 per hour. You can set maximum number of those units. Again, so if we wanted to, we'll say, set a maximum of 10 hours, it's going to calculate based on that $150 an hour rate that we need to allocate $1,500 of the client's budget to individual counseling. Or we can do it the other way. If we wanted to allocate a certain amount of money, it will calculate the maximum number of hours that allows for. And we can see from the client's overall budget that $600 has moved into the allocated activity funds. And it shows us what's not been allocated and what's remaining. And then if we enter contacts with that program and activity, again, instead of creating a charge for the client, it creates a charge against the contract and it will take the money off the budget. It also shows us how many hours are remaining after this one. If we then refresh the client's budget and program history, we can see what's been used and what's remaining. Once records are authenticated, they will also move into this approved column. And with level 2 of the contract module, you also have the option to do expenses. And expenses are any other charge that we want to enter against the client's budget that doesn't involve an activity or doesn't involve a contact. So this expense rate list is all customizable. You can put in any options in here. We can set rates per unit. So if, for example, we were putting in mileage as an expense, we might have a rate per unit of 60 cents a kilometer. Again, you can allocate a certain amount of the client's budget to each expense type if we wanted to. So if we said $500 of the client's overall budget can be used on mileage, we can allocate that. Or you might have other expense types that don't require a rate per unit, so that doesn't have to be set. And if we don't allocate any money, then it's just going to pull from the client's unreserved or non-allocated funds. And then expenses can either be entered on the client's contract here using the expense button, Or when we're entering a contact, you'll see you also have the option to add an expense on this page. And if we use that mileage example where we have a rate set, we can then put in the number of units. If we wanted to say for 20 kilometers, it's going to calculate based on that expense rate what the total expense dollar amount is. Or if there's no rate, you can just manually input the expense amount. And then we can save or authenticate the expense record. And again, if we refresh the client's budget, we're going to see that amount come off. Because I authenticated it, it's also approved. And I can see what's remaining in both the allocated money, the non-allocated, and overall. Again, we can always go into the client's contract tab to view all of their active contracts. And from the contract menu, we can look at all of their activity and expense records. So any of those records we enter that create a charge would show up there in the activity and expense records. We can also view that information at the global level using the global contract tab. We can search for existing contracts in the system, transactions from level 1, or activity and expense records, again, on a global level if we want to search for all of the records that have been entered in all client files. We also have the option in level 2 to reset and renew contracts. So once the contract is expired, or if we're closing it, if it's going to be rolled over into the next fiscal year or the next period, we can reset and renew the contract, which would close out this one and create another one with a new start date. Oops, all of the same budget amounts, all of the same activity and expense allocations, but everything would be set back to 0, and then the client gets to start over with their new dollar amounts. And we can do that reset and renew on a global level from the global tab if we want to renew all of the contracts that are expiring, all of the active contracts that are expiring at the end of the fiscal year. Whenever we can reset and renew all of them at once. I think that's it for level 2, but
I do have one question before we move on to level 3. There's a question, does the budget tell you when clients go over the budgeted amount?
So there's 2 options. You can either set it so that if you try to enter an activity or an expense and there's not enough money left in the budget to cover it, you can set it so that it doesn't allow the record to be entered. You just get an error and you can't enter the contact or the expense record. Or you can set it so that the client actually has to pay for any overage. So if there's $50 left in the client's budget and you try to enter a record that would cost $100, the budget would cover $50, and then the client, it would then create a client charge for the client to pay the remaining amount. So you can set it to work either way.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at level 3 then. I'm just going to log back in here. And we'll create another program history record. Pick our contract program. And this time you'll see that we have some more options. The first one being service fees. So service fees add an additional charge into every activity or expense record, kind of like a tax. So an additional either dollar amount or percent that's going to be charged on every record. And you can have default service fee rates, again, either a dollar amount or a percent, which can be overridden on the contract level. And you can also choose on a contract by contract basis if those service fees are applicable or not. Then you'll see you have the option to split the client's budget into a service provider budget and a worker budget. So workers are just workers within EMHware. Service providers are anyone outside the organization that are going to be providing service or submitting expenses that's going to be coming off this client's budget. So if I enter in the budget here, we'll say $10,000. I have it defaulted to all go into the service provider budget. But once I save that, I can transfer some of that money into the worker budget if I want to be able to split it up. We'll just split it in half and move 5,000 into the workers budget. Again, all of those adjustments and transfers are tracked. And then you can see the overall budget's been split into a worker budget and a service provider budget. It also forecasts how much of that overall budget is going to be needed to pay for those service fees because we have them set to applicable for this contract. So it kind of sets aside that extra money to pay for the service fees so that amount can't be spent. And you can see what's remaining as usable funds. And then we have the option to set worker activity rates. So rather than charging a certain amount based on the activity that's selected, this is going to charge a certain amount based on the worker and the activity. Again, you could have default rates set. So we have some options here. We can say that when Tom does counseling, he gets paid the advanced rate of $20.25 an hour. But we'll say that when Joanna does counseling, she just gets the basic rate, and that one is $15.80 an hour. Again, we can override those defaults on the contract level if needed. And then we can actually have EMHware calculate vacation pay, benefits, and stat pay for the workers. So we can have, again, default set for that based on how long the worker has been employed. And it's going to take that base rate, add in all of those options, also take into account the service fee that we have set, and it's going to calculate a total cost. So even though Tom's base rate is $20.25 an hour, once we add in all those extra things, vacation pay, benefits, stat pay, and that service fee, it's actually going to charge the client's budget or their contract $26.96 an hour for every hour of counseling that Tom provides the client. And then you can see it's doing the same thing for Joanna based on her rate. Every hour of counseling that Joanna provides this client, it's going to charge $21.03 an hour. We can also set worker expense rates. So same idea, if Tom submits mileage, he might get paid a certain rate. But if Joanna submits mileage, or maybe Joanna can only submit a different type of expenses. We can add all of that in here. Again, you can see some default service fees have been added based on the expense type. And we can either allocate a certain amount of the client's budget for each worker expense type, or we can have it set to pull from the unreserved funds. And you can see that we've allocated $500 for mileage for Tom, but it's going to take into account that service fee. So only $416 of that $500 can actually be spent on mileage. It's going to make sure that there's always enough money left to pay for those additional service fees. And then we can enter contacts under our contract program. I'm going to put this one in as Tom. And we'll say Tom did a counseling session with the client today for an hour. And then again, it's going to create that contract charge based on the total rate that it calculated per hour. We can refresh the client's budget. And we can see what's been used. So because we didn't allocate any of the client's budget to counseling sessions with Tom, it's just pulling from the client's unreserved funds. And we can do expense records by worker. Again, if we wanted to enter in mileage from Tom, we can put in the number of units, have it calculate the total dollar amount. It's going to add on that service fee for a total of $14.40. And that will update what's been used both in the client's overall budget. And you can see these are updating the worker's budget because it's both a worker activity and a worker expense that we put in. So that's all going to pull from the worker budget, as well as what's been used for the mileage allocation that we gave to Tom. And then you'll see we have the option to also add in service provider expenses. So again, service providers are anyone outside the organization. So this is going to pull from the address book. So we can pull from our agency address book. Maybe we have an outside therapist that's providing services to this client, and they're going to be paid from the client's budget. So we can set them as a service provider. We can say whatever they're going to be submitting expenses for. Again, we can allocate a certain amount of the client's budget for that service if we wanted to. And then we can submit expenses tied to that service provider. We can put in whatever the total expense dollar amount is. It's going to add on that service fee and create a total charge of $110, which will in turn update the expense rate for that service provider, what's been used, what's remaining. And in this case, the overall service provider budget, you can see what's been used and what's remaining of both allocated and unreserved, total amount, and overall for the client. And then we can always access the client's contract tab, again, to review their active contracts, or from the contract menu, we can view all of the activity and expense records that have been entered into the client's file, or use the global tab to do that on a global level. And then once the client's contract is completed, we can either discharge the client from the program, or if the contract's expiring and we want to renew it, we can do that reset and renew option. Level 3 does come with the client statement. So this client statement only works if the client has a budget. It will show the client's total budget, what's been allocated, what's been used, and what's remaining. And then you can print or PDF this client statement. And I think that's it for level 3.